All right, we're back, and it is COMP305. That's Game Programming 1, and it's the fall 2016 semester at Centennial, and it's week 3, part 1 of our broadcast. In the first class, we talked about, we started by, and in this class too, we did a bit of a progress check, right? So I want a progress update on your assignment number 1. For this first class, not so many people had it ready. For the second class, the second half, the second section, looks like most of you have it done, which is actually really good. And that's what I want. Here's the relation. I want to talk about the correlation between getting it done early or even starting early compared to the guys who don't start until the last week or the week that it's due. I always find that the people who start early always have better marks in general. Just a direct correlation. Like I find people who submit early, submit often, they always have a higher mark than the people who haven't started at all. Like I'm talking about in the 90s, all right? If you don't start at all, what happens is you wait to the last minute. That means you try to cram in as many requirements as possible at the last second, and you can't possibly meet all the requirements. It's impossible. There's a lot of little ones, which we'll go over. So again, please, the message is start early and submit often. That's the message, right? So if I look at assignment 2, if I look at assignment 1, I have assignment 2, but if I look at assignment 1, let's focus on that first. It's, again, due October 3rd on the Monday, just a reminder. Again, we're saying using the concepts from the twin stick shooter and the male pilot tutorials we're going to be doing. Create your own 2D arcade game. Must include enemies for the player to avoid and or destroy. It doesn't have to be destroyed. Okay, you can just avoid them. The piece that I want to focus on for most of the time when we get together for a progress update is the external document, your game design document. Why? Because that's your planning piece, right? A lot of times what happens is people do this as an afterthought. Tom asked me for it to be done, so I'm doing it now. But it's not really something you want to do, right? Because it's not your way. Your way is I just do. And then I'll kind of do all the requirements that Tom's asked me for after. Defeats the purpose. Can you do it that way? Yes, you can. Should you do it that way? I don't recommend it. All right. Why? Because you need a logo and table of contents and blah blah. So where do you get this? What kind of template are you going to use for this document? And what I've done is on Slack. If you look on Slack, I've put together earlier today. I've kind of shared with you that external document template. I'm going to pin it up there for you guys to see it. So I'm just going to pin it up on Slack. So you can have it, so it's pinned. And I've also included a couple things that we're going to be talking about today. I've got the male pilot assets for the tutorial for today, so I'm going to pin that as well. So you can get that. We can unpin it later on. And some other stuff I've got in there if you want to look. The other tutorial that we can look at is the Unity tutorial. Remember that whenever you see a tutorial in this course, right? I'm just going to put it out there to you guys, right? The tutorial for this course is a tutorial. It doesn't mean that you can use my assets or my scripts or the scripts that you see in any tutorial. So if you say something like, Tom, I did a tutorial online and the answer is you're going to get 0 if you used everything up from the tutorial online. It's got to be your stuff, right? So please, you can download other people's assets, certainly, but please do not use any tutorial online for your stuff at all right? Like for your scripts. Assets, no problem. Scripts is a 0, right? So please don't do that. And don't use the assets from the tutorials you see from my tutorials that you've seen or from the Unity tutorials online. So if you see Unity tutorials online like roguelike, or if you see something like the space shooter tutorial online, that's a no-go. Okay, you're not allowed to use those assets. Right? So don't use assets from a tutorial. You can use assets from the asset store. You can use assets from OpenGameArt. And I recommend if you're a gaming student, you make your own assets, even if they're simple, right? Because it's way more difficult to make assets on your own, and you're going to get a bonus for using them as opposed to if you use somebody else's assets. Okay, so we talked about this. So please, just from a reference perspective. So I've got the document, and I'm going to pull it up for you for a second, right? I kind of put it up on Slack. So if you open that document up, right, the one that I pinned, right, this one, open the external game document. If I open that up, right, and let's see where that is now. I got all kinds of Maya. I'll just bring it up from my other files, 397. I want to look at that external game document. I want to build that external game document a little with you, just so you understand what I'm looking for. So here's what it looks like. This is the default external game document, right? And of course, I've kind of put it together with some extras, right? I'm going to call it my mail pilot. Let me just undo, if I can undo all these things. I think I have an update. I overrode my external game document. That's okay. This morning, I was very tired, is what I can tell you. Right, here it is. This is the one. All right, so here's the external game document with my, notice they have a space for a logo, and it's got a simple border around here, right? So here's what I want you to do. So for the game company title, now please bring it up. Go to Slack. Don't look at me. If you don't have it already, if you don't have an external game document, go to Slack and download it and do it with me, right? So that way you can start your external game document now if you haven't started, as opposed to waiting for this to happen later on, right? We want to build it together, because if this is the first time you're doing it, then it'll get you going. And remember, the external game document's worth a hefty amount of marks, right? So for this first assignment, like I think it's worth 10 or something crazy like that, right? So not doing it is crazy, right? Even if you just hand me pictures, it's not enough, right? Pictures are good, but I want you to put all your stuff into one document, all right? One place where I can look online. We'll talk about how to put it up online on GitHub later on. All right, so we've got this company, and what I want to do, I want to rename my company name so it makes sense. Again, my company name is, let's say, Purple Hex Studios. Purple Hex, I'm making it up. Purple Hex Game Studios. It doesn't matter. And here's my company logo, right? I want to put it in here. So I'm going to replace my company logo. I have a logo I can use, right? So I can go to my logo right here. Here it is. I kind of pull logo in here, and there it is. And I want to pull it up. There we go. And this is my logo. Okay. And again, I can change the size of this thing so it's kind of positioned in the middle or whatever I want, right? So I can kind of move it around. There it is. All right. It's up to you how you want to do this. And my document title should be the title of my game, let's say. So that'll be like Mail Pilot. Right? And then the subtitle will be something else that related to the what you're building. So let's say I'm going to call this something like a Unity game. You know, maybe a retro shooter, whatever you want to call it. Like I said, Unity game earlier. We'll call it a retro shooter. And if it's too big, the subtitle looks like bigger than the title. You can always make it smaller. And get rid of this extra brace here. There we go. So far I've got the beginning of my document. I've got my logo, half a point. Seriously. Right? Okay, my version number right now is 01 because I'm just starting off today. Obviously it's not 2012, it's 2016 by Purple Hex game Purple Hex Game Studios. There we go. All rights reserved. My author name, if it's only me, and I'm making this one, because remember, all the assignments for assignment 1, it's individual. Okay, you're not combining with anyone else. You're not working with anyone else on assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3. You're all working alone on this one, right? For the first 3 assignments. The last project, you work with somebody else, right, or other couple people, right? But for these ones, it's all individual. All right, so author's name for me is my name. You can put your name in there, obviously. And then the date of the document. So the date of document today is September 24th, right, 2016. And notice in the second page, you can also put that in there as well in the header. So September 4th, 2016. There you go. Or you can pull it down. Notice the Mail Pilot goes up on here. That's fine. Table of contents, I'm not going to include yet, but I will. Well, you can basically install a table of contents using the Word table of contents if you're using Word, or you can actually list just a list of contents that have hyperlinks to internally into the document. Right now, there's none. I'm not going to put them in yet. On the bottom, my version number should be on the bottom of my footer. So my version number is 01. This is 01 of my document, not just 01 of my game, right? When my game updates, I should update this, right? Yeah. Version history. A lot of times what I want in version history, I'm telling you in advance, is a link to your GitHub. Might as well put the link to your GitHub in here. Now, for GitHub, I've already started my mail pilot today, my project. But if I hadn't, then, you know, and I'm starting it off from scratch, I would go to GitHub, and I already have a mail pilot project I'm working with on GitHub. I'm going to leave it like this until I catch up to this, right? But let's say, for example, I've got my code. So here's my mail pilot link for GitHub, mail pilot, right, for the fall 2016 scenario. And if I go to my document, I want to kind of take that link and say, you know, GitHub link. Oops. I want to say, and of course, if it's the thing, it's left position. So GitHub link is this. And then you're going to put underneath my GitHub link in my version history, I'm going to point to the version. I might take a screen capture of my commits and put them here. So example for now, I do have some commits. I have a couple of commits. And what I would do is I would take a screen capture of my commits here, right? Actually, yeah, I'll do another commit later on. Well, let's say, for example, I just had these. I can do a screen capture. On the Mac, it's Command Shift 4. On the PC, it's Control Alt print screen, right? So you do a screen capture. So I want to do a screen capture, and all I want is these commits here. So I added an ocean and so on, and I'll take these commits and I'll add them into my document. So here's my commits, right? So I'll put them in, and that's what I have so far with version 1, let's say, or version 0.1. Whenever you finish doing things, right? And then for this part, this is just a description of the game, the body of your document, what it is. So you can get rid of it. This is just for you. So it says, hey, this is the body of your video game document. You add stuff or delete sections as you need, right? So let's get rid of this. Right. Okay, good. Now, in your game overview, you talk about what this game's about. So you say Mail Pilot is a simple retro side-scrolling shooter game. The player's ship or plane, as an example, is limited to the bottom portion of the screen and can only move side to side. Background ocean graphic scrolls from the top or top-down direction in a kind of a top-down direction, right? The player must avoid killer clouds, right? And while he is, he or she drops off mail to the islands. Something like that. Game overview. Game mechanics. I'll leave this. I won't put this in yet. How does the game work? I may put some of the same stuff in game mechanics, or I can put the camera is an orthographic projection camera. So camera for this game uses an orthographic projection. There you go. So there's no perspective. It's just orthographic. It's from a top-down view. From a top-down, or I'll say bird's eye. Which keys does your game use? How do you do it? And this game for me, the controls for this game is is with the mouse only. Right? So the mouse allows the player to move left to right across the bottom of the screen. I'm repeating myself what I said. Saving and loading, I won't have any saving and loading, so I'm taking this section out, right? Interface sketch, this is where you put in your interface sketch of what your game would look like. Your wireframe goes right in here, okay? So I kind of was working on a wireframe earlier. Did I save it? Maybe not, right? I may have had it somewhere else, but I can make a simple wireframe. Usually what you do is you go somewhere with a, I used mock-ups earlier today. So people who saw me, there's a mock-up online. So I kind of put together a little simple diagram. I got some clouds. I drew the island, right? Let's make my island a little bit. I was kind of unhappy with this drawing, but anyways. But the clouds, there's 3 clouds and the player's movement, and you want to put in some details about how the player moves around. Very simple. Again, you can. I'm just using mock-ups online here, but I don't have an account, so how do I do that? I can do a screen capture again. So I'm going to Control-Alt, print screen, or Command-Shift-4, and I can capture this little thing that I drew. As an example, there we go. I make another screen capture, and here's my screenshot. I put it up in Fireworks or whatever. I can drag and drop as well as my document. So there it is. So copy, and I go back to my Word document, and where this little line is, right? I paste. It's massive, so I can reduce the size, and so it looks like this, right? And good. So now menu and screen descriptions is really, it really talks about your screen captures. So if I capture screens, like it says that, screenshots and accompanying descriptions for menus or additional screens, right? So I don't have any of those yet because I haven't made my game yet. So I can't really do a screen capture on those. But as I go through the game, I would do several screenshots. Like for example, when the game starts, when the game isn't playing, when the game is over, all those kind of things is what I want to try and capture, maybe 3 or 4 of them at least. And in the document that I gave you, it tells you these are the things you need, right? Game world, I don't really think I need to describe that because I kind of described my environment already. There is no more than 1 level, so I probably don't have to describe that. You know, for this one, even game progression, there's no real game progression. Characters, this is applicable because I only have my avatar, so the player's avatar is a simple biplane that seems to fly over the ocean, over a scrolling ocean, right? The player's movement is limited to right to left, something like this, right to left only to increase the difficulty of the game. And maybe the increase the challenge is probably what it is, challenge of the game, challenge level. There we go. Non-player characters. So someone who has non-player characters, like escort ship, as an example, right? That would be listed here, right? So if you have an escort, kind of a second player that comes with you or whatever, you have to protect, that would be non-player characters, and you would list them here. I don't have any in my game, so I'm going to take this section out. Enemies. So the enemies, what are they? The enemies in the game are killer clouds that the player must avoid. We will add animated lightning if time allows. Right? Because basically, you have you know, you're going through these clouds, and then you can imagine there's lightning, and then if you can imagine that, then that's what's happening. Weapons. There is no weapons for the player, so I'm not going to give him any weapons. He's not going to get weapons in this game. Items. Anything to hide or hinder the character is not going to get any extra items. Abilities. Well, I could actually put an item in there. The items that he wants to do is the cloud, the islands. So the characters, the player's main pickup, player's main pickup, in quotations, is the island. As he passes over the island, the player gains points. We're going to talk about that, how many points he gets. Right? Abilities, he doesn't have abilities. Vehicles, we kind of have an avatar, but that's all he has. Scripts, if you want to include script samples, you can do that here. Right? Scoring, how does he score and how does he die? The player, I'll change this to lowercase, bold, and maybe italics like we have everything else, just to make it the same. The player gains points when the player's plane passes over the islands, right? Each island the plane passes over, gives the player, or awards the player, what awards, wordsmithing already, awards the player 100 points. Okay. The player starts with 5 lives. Each time player collides with a killer cloud, he loses a life. Right? That's how the game works. So you're describing in words how your game is going to work. So even before you have anything in there, basically what I'm going to look at I can look at your game document to understand what you're building. Right? That's what this thing is all about. That's why it's due before your game is due. Right? Typically, that's why I wanted to check it today to see what you had. Right? Puzzles and mini games. There is no puzzles and mini games in this case. There's no bonuses for this one. I don't have any cheat codes, but if I did, I would put them in here. For my sound index, I'd probably put a table in here of a sound index. My story index, if I was going to talk my story, what my story is, I would kind of talk about my story. You are a male pilot, and you're traveling in rough weather. You must, this kind of stuff. Almost like the story of what the game is about. Not so much about the overview, but actually as if this is your story, right? Art multimedia index. My recommendation is you kind of put your assets inside of a table that you list, and I've got an example of that I'm going to pull up. So, for example, let's say I have in my assets today, I have a asset table that I kind of created earlier today, right? So it looks like I'm using Excel. So I kind of do one of these. I kind of say, well, here's my name, my image, my details, and then here's the name of the file, plane.ping, island.ping, cloud.ping, ocean.gif, and this is a table of my assets. So I take all this, and then I copy it. And my recommendation when you paste it into your document is that you don't just paste it in, you paste it in as a graphic. It's easier to control. So you say edit, paste special, and make it into a ping image, right? So it looks like this, right? And then if it doesn't work properly, you can paste that to the next line. Okay, so this is an example of all your assets in the game, right? Make sense? That's what I'm looking for from your external document. Your external document should have all this stuff. Design notes, anything that happened that made your game go really well, or things you noticed when you were designing, like because you could like almost like a post-mortem. You do this kind of stuff at the end, right? So you put your design notes in there to say something like, I really had trouble with moving my mouse. I had to use an offset. I'm looking to see if I can find, and almost like your personal notes about stuff you had trouble with or things that you enjoyed when you're building this game. Stuff like that you put in there. And then future features, things that if you had time, and if you had more time to do stuff, what kind of future features could you include here? Like for example, future features would include multiple levels with this, second and other levels can have the player being able to shoot other planes that come in to try and steal the mail before the player gets there, kind of thing. And I want the islands to have some kind of little mail icon. So when the player passes over it, the mail icon disappears. But if the foreign plane goes over the mail, he steals the plane from me, the mail from me, right? So it's a race to get the mail before the other plane gets it. And the other planes are not affected by the weather. They're better planes than mine. They can avoid the clouds, whereas I have to continuously zoom in and out of the clouds because I have a little biplane, right? So I can put all that in future features, makes it a more interesting game, right? I want background noise. I want a background music that I want to compose, feature, right? I want to add a little bit of lighting to the game, so when I move from one part to the other, parts of my ship light up a little bit differently. I want every single level that I go to, one level, my third level will have rain effects, particle effects. My fourth level will have snow that gathers on the player's plane and that slows them down. You know, those kind of things, like different things. My fifth level is a night level where I can't see everything so well, and I only see a very small amount of the screen. You know, you can continue to make it more difficult. And then my sixth level has a boss plane that comes at me and shoots all kinds of weapons, and that's the one I have to destroy. Right? So again, do I expect this for this assignment 1? No, but I mean, future features are things you can list down there. If you're looking to make this your final project, or the first level of your final project, list all your ideas as much as you can down here, so that way you can, when you come to your friend you're going to work with at the end, or friends that you're working with on your final project, you can sit there and go, so here's the ideas I have for mine. What do you have for yours? And then you can compare. And if you like one idea, you can take them and use them. Remember that in your final project, right, you'll have to pick one person's assignment number 1 from one person. You can't just say, well, I'm going to use my assignment 1 and your assignment 1 and his assignment 1, and we're going to make a final project with 3 of our assignment 1s, right? Please don't try and do that. That's not going to fly. No, you can pick assignment 1, or you can use assignment 1, assignment 2, or assignment 3 as a kickoff point for your final project. Again, assignment 1, side-scrolling shooter or a scrolling shooter. Assignment 2 is a platformer, right? Assignment 3 is a first-person perspective game, so 3D, right, which is much harder. From a level of, like I said, a level of challenge to make these games, the second one, assignment 2, is way harder than assignment 1 because you're using a physics. It's a platformer. There's lots of little things to consider when you do that. Assignment 3 is going to be harder because there's terrain. We have to do more modeling with Blender or Maya or something, right? And so that's a more challenging. Of course, whenever we add that third dimension, it just makes it that much more challenging for collisions and gameplay and everything else, and it takes much longer to make, right? So if you want to challenge yourself, you and your partners make a 3D game. If you want to give yourself somewhat challenge, a medium challenge, platformer, which is a lot of people did last semester. And if you don't want to challenge yourself at all, then just keep making the retro shooter game. Although you can make it very interesting because you can add additional, like I said, additional levels, more challenge, other screens to make it more interesting, and so on, right? So it's not like it can't be a good game. It just means you have to work a little harder, you know, to make it so that it's really awesome. So that's your document, and that's what I recommend. At the bare minimum, you start filling in your document now. Now, if you had this stuff for today, an external document and your assets and so on, you would get a full check. You would have got like 2%. It would be like a little lab that you get 2% on. If you got some things, but not all the things, so you only just did like a diagram. If all you did was a diagram today, you didn't have any assets or anything like that, you probably would have got half a check, right, in reality, right? And if you did nothing or very close to nothing, you get 0, right? Now, it sounds like a little harsh, but it's just a progress report. So if you hadn't started, right, like today, and if you're one of those people that I went and said X, right, and I said you hadn't started today, that's an indicator that you need to move your ass. Sorry to say it on video here, but you need to move, right, and do what you have to do, because otherwise, you know, you're not moving fast enough. You know, you're going to get inundated with other stuff that's going to happen, and it's going to really impact you, right? That's all I'm saying. Any questions about the external document for that are required? Yes. Yes, so the question is, if you have, I took out the weapons section, right? Again, one thing I'm missing here is my table of contents. I would just add this in as a Word thing. You can make a table of contents appear here with Word. But what I'm saying is, if I've taken out a section that you need to keep for yourself as an example, then you can include it. I've just not included it because I don't have weapons in my game, right? At least not in the iteration I'm making, right? But if you are using weapons in the game, then certainly you would include that. Anything that you use that I don't use, it's your document. And by the way, don't look at this document as the be-all and end-all. This is just a template. Dress it up. Make it look like it's yours. Do a different border. Add a different paper color. Do some stuff. Make it so it's more interesting, because this is the bare minimum that you would need, the one I'm giving you, right? And I'm not dressing it up because it's got to look like it's yours. It's your game studio. Imagine if this is you are an independent developer, and you're working, on a game for, for me, right? I'm the client, right? Any other questions around this? All right, so I'm going to save this one. I think I like this one a little bit more. Oh, I did it again. I'm going to save this one. It's okay. I got the one on Slack. And I'll put this inside this mail. I'm going to call it Mail Pilot GDD. GDD is game design document, and that's the one that I would recommend. Right? So this is the one that it would look like. Let's take a look. Yeah. Any questions around that before we move on? Okay, so the first part is I've checked you, see if you've started. I've talked about your external game document. Please crack it. Get cracking on when it comes to this kind of stuff. If you don't get cracking, you don't start. Have you started yet? You did a sketch? Good. Okay. So if you haven't started, get cracking today. Start moving. Start putting the external game document today. We have 4 hours. You can certainly follow me and do stuff with me as a tutorial. But today, after we're done, it'll take you no more than an hour to catch up to what I've done. Right? Like truly. So you have everything you need. Remember that you're also doing a GitHub repo. There's 2 more things you're doing that I'm requiring you for your build, right? A GitHub repo with a repository of your code, and a link to your, or on eCentennial, I'm looking for a WebGL build, right? That's part of your requirements. Like, certainly I could download and do my own WebGL build, but I'm asking you to do it. It's a requirement of your submission, okay? So do that for me, and then also test it out, see if it works. What if I try and do it, but your WebGL build fails because you've done something that made it fail? We'll talk about that today. Okay, so all these things are due, again, next week or the week after on Monday. It'll be the Monday, October the 3rd is when all this is due, by midnight. Again, submit and submit often. I'll take your last submission, right? Even if you submit and you forgot something, it's easy for us to go through and do another submission and kind of do a check of what you're doing. Okay. I've also included on Centennial a couple of things on the GitHub here, right? I've put my version of the twin stick shooter that I'll be reviewing today. I've finished the twin stick shooter, right? I've also put up on eCentennial another presentation, which is the twin stick shooter part 2. So for part 1, we did movement last week, and we did shooting. That's all you could do, right? Movement and shooting for your plane. I've finished it off. I've added enemies, music, sounds, all that kind of stuff. My recommendation to you is you finish off the tutorial with the 2 PowerPoint presentations on your own. And the reason for this is because you need to check it out and have trouble that you fix, right? Because if I just step through this whole thing with you from one step to the other, right? Yes, I can solve some of your issues. And I'm going to talk about it today. I'm going to actually bring up the code. But please go to GitHub right now, download the twin stick shooter and install it on the machine in front of you or on your machine. So take my twin stick shooter and install it. I want to go over it with you step by step so I can talk about what I did a little different and what challenges I had by following the book. Because by the way, there's some errors in the book, some things that didn't quite work, right, with the twin stick shooter that should have worked if you followed the book. And I'll bring that up with Unity. So if I go to Unity, I'll wait for you guys to come up with it. So please download it. If you want the link, you can also get the link for the twin stick shooter up on Slack. So if you look at Slack, and if you kind of go on COMP305, you can see that further down I have a couple of things that I've included. And there is on GitHub is the twin stick shooter from class. This is the one I did. It's right here. I kind of posted it at 10:19 a.m. So grab that one. That's the link for it from GitHub and download it and install it on your machine. Okay. So that's where we're going to be starting today. Last week's repo we finished off. If you wanted to start from there, I recommend for people in this class, in this section, if you haven't finished it or if you haven't continued it, start from lesson 2B. And I put that up there too, just in case if you want to rebuild it tonight at home or whenever you want to do it on your own. I know some of you will choose not to finish it because there's some people who just don't want to do their homework or they have other things that are more important or more fun to do. I highly recommend you do this tutorial and maybe another one. And the reason for that is you'll get really comfortable. I want you to be really comfortable with the controls, right? And the user interface. Unity doesn't have a very complex user interface, but it has a user interface. To get used to the user interface takes a little bit of time. And I recommend you build some stuff out, fail at it, fix it, Google it, and so that when you come to class, you get the most out of the class, right? As opposed to, let me do it all, right? Letting me do it all, yes, I can solve some problems, certainly for you. I can show you how to do it. And we're going to do that with MailPilot. MailPilot, I'm going to build with you from the beginning to the end, right? Because it's my game that we're making, right? But the tutorials that are in the book, they're in the book, and they're complete from A to Z. So you can follow them as a step through to get you used to the stuff. And part of your reading, the reading requirement for this course is, and to make the most out of it, is to do some of it on your own. Just so that way you have a little bit of a basis for what we talk about. So you can ask questions that are valid in class. Say, hey, Tom, I didn't quite get how to do this. I looked at the book's tutorial, and I had a problem with this one. Can you help me? Yes, because then we can talk about something that we're doing together. Okay, so I'm assuming if you please download the shooter so we can talk about it. Let's take a look at this thing. So I'm going to bring it up. So if you go to Unity, and if I bring up the twin stick shooter here, you can hear. I've updated my Unity to 5.4.1, right? So that's my latest version, and so my version might be slightly different than yours. It does include sounds, okay, but I have turned them off for this tutorial. So if I looked at the camera, the main camera has an audio source for the background music. I've just turned it off on mine. But for you, if you check it out, if you actually try and play it, if it's turned off, just turn it back on and you can hear the background music. So here's how it works. So the final version looks like this. Okay, so I play, and I've got my ship. What I've done is I've made some changes. So there's these things are coming at me, and I'm firing at them. Okay. And if I run away, notice that the camera, in my version, scrolls along with my ship. So as I move my ship, I've kind of made that change. Okay? And I keep firing at these things as I move away, and everything scrolls with my ship. And now here's wave 2. I'm using the tutorial uses particle effects and so on to go. Okay, things that I've added. Notice that my lives are like -7, right? So lives, there is no lives if you look at the tutorial in the book. So I kind of added this in, right? So if your lives go to 0, then obviously the game is over. So what it's missing is a game over screen. The other thing that I've done is because I've extended it so that way if I go up, the camera moves up. If I move off far enough, right? If I keep moving far enough away, eventually I will get to the edge of the screen, which is bad, right? Because that means like somehow I'm not in space anymore, right? Which doesn't make any sense. But the enemies will still follow me forever, right? So that's kind of an issue. We have to figure out, how would you figure out to not go here? Well, obviously you would limit the camera so it wouldn't go beyond this point, right? So you would limit the camera. Other things to note. In the original tutorial, your player object itself, if you look at the player ship, if I scroll up, the order in layer is 0, right? That's where it starts off, order in layer. Order in layer basically says how the objects in the viewport are stacked, right? So you have one object stacked on another object, stacked on another object. If everything is on layer 0, it's going to look weird in our MailPilot game. So, and also, if I move it to layer 0, let's move this back to layer 0. Now I've kind of moved it to layer 5. Yours online might be layer 0. If it's layer 0, it looks like this. If I press play, you can see that when I fire the bullets, right, it looks like the bullets are coming from on top of the ship, right? You can see the bullets coming out, right? until I get surrounded by this like virus, whatever it is, right? Right. So the bullets come on top, right? I don't want that. I want the bullets to come underneath the ship, and you can change that by changing your order and layer so that the ship is higher than the bullets, right? So if I save that, save the scene, and press play, you can see that when I fire the bullets now, they appear to come from the nose of the ship or underneath the ship, as opposed to on top of the ship. See, I'm almost dead again. Look, right? So it's quite a difficult game with the way the options, the things move, right? There we go. And I'm dead. Okay. Here's something that you can also do. If you notice, we can change the properties of objects. Anything that's listed in the inspector, we can change in real time when we're playing. So if I want to increase the rate of speed of my character, my player, when I'm playing, watch. I play, then I change my speed to, let's say, 20, right? I can actually want to run away much quicker than the player, the other enemies, right? Actually, I can move faster than my bullets, right? If I want to, right? But no, notice that it's changed here. It's blue. It's kind of blue on the screen. That means there's a change. But if I stop it, it goes back to 4. So I can make changes and test things out in play, and it shouldn't affect anything that's in the hierarchy. However, it will affect some things that are prefabs. Okay, if you haven't done this tutorial, then you may not know what prefabs are. Prefabs are prefabricated objects that we create. And the way we do them is we create the object first in the hierarchy, we add components, things like colliders and everything else, and then we pull them into something called a prefabs folder that's inside of our assets. That's what we're doing. And so in the course of the tutorial, if you do this at home, you will pull in a few prefabs, your enemy prefab, your explosion prefab, and your laser prefab. So the enemy prefab is this enemy ship, and it has a couple of things. It has a circle collider, and the circle collider is a geometry that goes around the ship that basically says that if you touch the ship, then there's a collision, right? There's also a couple of audio sources, right? The first audio source is when it gets hit, and the other one is when it gets when it explodes, and that's handled by the explosion. So here's the explosion, right? Notice that I don't get a preview over here for prefabs, only down here. So my enemy, you can see, but my explosion, I got nothing, right? Because my explosion is a particle system. So if you want to see the explosion, I can pull it into the hierarchy. This is what it looks like, right? Let me turn off my player ship just so you can see the explosion, right? I go back to my explosion, and what it looks like is I can simulate it over and over again, but this is what the explosion would look like. It's just a bunch of particles, right, that kind of go off. And if you follow the tutorial, it tells you how to position the particles, how to change the duration of the particles. Duration is the lifetime of the particles. It also, kind of takes care of the speed of the particles, in which direction, and so on, and many other things that it talks about here. The shape of the particles. So take a look at this. The particle system. Particle systems in animation for assignment number 1 are not required. Okay, you don't need animation. You don't need particles, but it's neat to see them in a tutorial, see how they work. Okay. The other thing is when you have an object as a prefab, notice that there's the explosion here, but there's also an explosion here, right? Well, if it's in my hierarchy, then it automatically is part of my scene, right? And if it's not in my hierarchy, but inside my prefabs, I can programmatically call it into being, right? By referencing the prefab objects, almost like creating an instance of the prefab objects inside of my hierarchy, right? It kind of creates an instance. So if I run this the way it is right now, let me show you what it looks like. So I'll bring my player back. I've just made him. I've disabled him. I'm going to enable him again. There it is. And if I run the game, you're going to see an explosion first off. Watch. Right? The explosion happens, and you hear a bit of a sound. Why? Because I've got an explosion at position 000 in my hierarchy, which means it's anything in my hierarchy is instantiated as soon as my game starts. Okay. So let's just get rid of this thing. Let's get rid of the explosion. So you can delete any prefab that's already been created because I can always pull it back in. Same thing with the enemy or the laser or whatever. All these things that are here are just prefabricated objects. They're still the same objects that we normally see with a bunch of different properties and behaviors that are linked to them. Like, for example, my laser has a box 2D collider on it, right? A box collider 2D, right? So it can collide with other objects. And it has a script called laser behavior that's on it, right? It doesn't have to, right? But we've made our laser so that whenever I call my laser into being, it behaves a certain way. Okay, each laser is an individual object. Okay, they're not the laser that comes out, these laser objects are not the same object. It's different objects, almost like I'm instantiating a different object, and I use the instantiate keyword to do that. Now this is bad, and I'm talking about game design now. And the reason why this is bad is because it's programmatically or computationally expensive to continue to instantiate objects every single time I press the button. What's far better is if I had an object pool, right? So if I had a pool of shots that I have somewhere off screen that aren't doing anything, right? And they're dormant, if you will. And then when I need them and I press the button, they transport themselves or move to the position that I want them, and then they shoot out. That's far better computationally than having an object that's instantiated, because I get these ebbs and flows inside my performance in the game. Example, when I instantiate stuff, I have an ebb, right? Kind of like it kind of goes down in terms of performance because I'm instantiating. And then when I destroy objects, which I do, then I have kind of a peak, and my performance rises again. So I have this rise and fall of performance over and over again, which makes it for a very inconsistent game for some systems. Now, for most of us, we probably won't notice it if it's a very simple game like this. But if you're on a mobile device, that's where you really see it, right? Because mobile has a lot less memory, and it's almost going back to the old days again in terms of the capacity of a mobile device. Now that's changing. As things go on, you're going to see that there's mobile devices are like mini computers, and you're not going to really see much of a performance hit. But imagine if you don't just have 10 enemies, you have 1,000 enemies on the screen, right? And you have each one of them is firing bullets that are instantiating every time they fire. That's a lot of things. Even if the bullets are little tiny stars, right? You're talking about a lot of objects that your game controller has to keep track of. That's a lot of stuff. And I mean game controller as in the game controller object here that's inside the hierarchy, right? So the more objects you have to keep track of, and the more objects have collisions, and the more objects are being instantiated, you get this kind of downturn of performance, right? And then when you destroy them, you get this upturn in performance, which means you kind of start and stop. Your game seems to slow down and speed up, which is bad. Better to have bad performance through the entire game than up and down performance. That's bad. Obviously, you want good performance for the entire game, right? But it's better to have just consistently slow performance, because at least you can play the game. But if it continuously slows down and gets slower and slower and slower, that's unplayable. It becomes undoable. The game is not a game anymore. Okay, it's just points. So in the book, we're making an example. So it has lasers and explosions that are instantiated and enemies, right? Enemies are all instantiated and they're destroyed. But the better thing to do is have a set number of explosions and enemies, right, that are already off screen that you enable and put them back on screen. So put them somewhere way far away that the player won't be able to see until you need them. And then recycle them. Call them into being. Make them visible again. You can make them invisible too. You can make enemies invisible and make them visible again as they appear. Reset them. And we're going to do that today in our mail pilot example. The mail pilot example we're going to make today, the tutorial, we're going to reset our enemies over and over again. We're not going to make new enemies. It's going to appear like we have lots of enemies, but we're going to only have 3. All right? We're going to show you how to do that, right? So that's one thing that they've done different in the book. Also, from a scripts perspective, notice that we have a canvas element that's here that we need for our UI. All right, so our UI element, you see that there's score 0, lives 5, and wave 0. In the book, there's no lives. I've added that element in there, right? That keeps track of lives. What you do is when you add a UI element, you need something called a canvas. And so you see that right now, the ship is here, and maybe the viewport is here. This is what we see in the camera. And yet the background looks like it's like this. It's really big. And if you go back outside of this background, that's where you see the blue, right? But what about all this? Well, this is what the UI looks like. So the UI is actually on a different level altogether, right? It's a representation of what your screen is going to look like. And I think Unity does it in a smart way. They kind of separate it out. Even though it looks like it's up here, it's not really up here. This is where you can set up the UI so it doesn't affect the actual game itself. It's projected. And this UI is projected on top of your screen and doesn't interact with it. Okay? And that's the new UI that Unity uses. So it's actually there. It's another plane that exists outside of your game, but is layered on top of it so you can see it, right? So UI elements, we're going to talk about UI elements when we get to that. It won't be this week probably, but next week. If you go to your UI, like for example, my lives counter, here's my lives counter right here. You can see that it has a rect transform as opposed to a transform, and it is relative. It's relative to the top center of the screen, right? Because this game uses a flowing or relative aspect ratio. So depending on what you play this game on, if I play it on a mobile device, it'll shrink to fit that mobile device. If you play it on a big screen, it'll fit in the big screen, which is kind of good. And it'll position your objects on the game, like your score and your lives and your the wave number. It'll position them relative to different positions. For example, my score is linked to the top left corner of the game, so it's relative to the top left corner. And my wave is relative to the top right corner. And my lives are relative to the middle of the screen. Right? That's what happens. So you can see if you play the game, so if I play the game, and somehow I change the size of my screen, right? I change like this, you can see that it's going to reposition my objects on my game, and I've died like 25 times here. But you can see it's going to reposition stuff all over the screen, especially if I play it in maximize view. So if I maximize on play, I click this inside the game window, it'll maximize the view that I have. Here it is. And you can see that this is relative to the right side of my screen. This is kind of relative to the middle, and this is relative to the right. And then I can run away. And hopefully I can run away quickly because I'm going to die, right? This virus that's coming after me, right? But I'm also going to be able to come to the edge of the screen faster this way because of the size of my screen. A couple of things I didn't like. There's a side. A couple things I didn't like for this one. I know it's a twin stick shooter, and Pedro's going to kill me. But I'm pointing in one direction. I know it's independent, and flying in a completely other direction, right? I would have liked to see where I'm pointing if it was my type of game, right? Where I'm pointing is where I'm flying, right? So I'm flying this way, I'm pointing that way. Again, the aspect of a twin stick shooter is that you can point in one direction and fly in another one, right? That's the whole idea of the twin stick shooter. I probably, if I was going to make a retro side-scrolling game, I probably would have made it so wherever I'm pointing, that's where I'm flying. So if I press the W key here, I'd go this way as opposed to up, right? That's just me. And of course, if I went lower than 0 health, then I would die. The game would be over, which I haven't coded yet. Okay. So I wanted to show you this stuff because there's differences from what it shows in the game, in the book. Your game controller. So you have a bunch of objects. Here's your objects, and the game controller object itself, this one, is an empty object that we're using to keep track of things like score, and also to control the waves of enemies that come at you. That's what the game controller is. We're going to use the same pattern when it comes to making Mail Pilot. We're going to do the same thing here, right? Now the game controller is being programmed by a script special just for that. And if you take a look at it for a second, and I didn't have a chance to talk about this earlier today too much, but one thing to notice is that you have this filter or this attribute on top of your script. And this attribute here shows the header with a string of wave properties, a string literal. Well, notice what this does is, in the inspector, in the game, if I look at the game controller, it actually sections off a bunch of variables in sections. So wave properties, user interface, and so on. So if I go back to this, you can see that there's wave properties and user interface, and it just splits off different variables that we're making available on the inspector. We're going to talk about things that we're not going to put on the inspector today too. Okay. One thing I didn't have a chance to talk about too much is the idea of explosions and how they work, right? So here's my player behavior script, right? My player behavior script has rotation and movement, and it also triggers shooting the laser and all that stuff. My enemies move towards the player. That's all they do. They just they find the player's position, they change the angle to where the player is, and they start moving towards the player. And that's how they work. That's all the enemies do, right? However, from an enemy perspective, what happens is we also check for collisions, right? And in the book, it gives you this code right here for checking for collisions. So it says here, I talked about collisions last week, about how collisions are just, you intersect the collider. You have a collider component that you add to an object, right? And the collider component has a shape, for example, a box. And if the two boxes intersect, you have a collision. That's how it works, right? Now, there's two types of collisions. A physics-based collision, where you use on-collision enter 2D, right? Physics-based collision. And the other kind of collision is a trigger. So a trigger collision, or a trigger collider, if you will, right? In this case, they're using on-collision enter 2D, which is actually a physics collision. But only one object, or one group of objects, has rigid bodies, and that is your enemies. Your enemies have rigid bodies, but your players don't. So your player is not affected by the enemy crashing into him or her, right? So that's a problem. I understand how they do that, but I'd rather use trigger colliders. And the reason why I remember triggers, if you kind of pass over a trigger, like a spot on the game, it triggers a response. I'd rather have that happen for this kind of collision because we're doing a retro 2D shooter. It's not a platformer. For a platformer, 100%. I think collisions using the on-collision enter 2D, on-collision stay, and on-collision exit are perfect. But for 2D, sometimes you'll see a problem with this. Okay. Also, notice how we detect which object I collide with. They say, well, if, I remember collision 2D has a special object, right? This is the collision, and this should be the other object, basically. So the collision game object.name contains laser. Well, then you're hitting the laser, make the hit sound, right? And make the hit sound happen. Otherwise, this is the one I put in. If your collision game object name contains player ship, then decrease the lives of the player, right? That's what I do here. So that's my own little code that I put in to make the lives decrease. And you can check it if you actually go through the code and compare it with what I put in there. There's some slight differences with the ones they'll get you to make compared to what I'm doing. Okay. So very simple kind of behavior. I'm also going to be talking about audio. They did audio a little wanky, right, in terms of how the audio works. And one of the problems with the audio, if you've tried this out, is they have something called an audio source. I don't know why that screen went green. They have something called an audio source right here. And the audio source, right, what they ask us to do is they want us to play the audio source and do something called, well, I'll show you the audio. Play one shot. This is it, play one shot, right? Well, this won't work the way they had coded it, right? The shoot sound, actually you have to, in order for you to play the shoot sound, you actually have to drag and drop an object in the hierarchy. And let me show you that. So in the hierarchy, you can see that to play the shoot sound, if I go to my prefab, right? Here's my laser, right? The laser has, if you notice, there's no audio here, right? The laser is part of the player ship. The player ship has a shoot sound, right? Here's the shoot sound. Well, guess what? They didn't include, in the tutorial, they didn't tell you to drag and drop your shoot sound inside the shoot clip inside the shoot sound. So if you tried it, it wouldn't make any noise at all, right? So the way to do that, of course, is if you go to sounds, you can actually drag and drop an object. When it turns blue, you know you've got it right, as a reference to the shooting sound. And then what you can do is you can use that script that says play one shot, right? Which is down here. Right? Play one shot. Now you'll see this if you try this on your own. That's why I'm telling you about it. You'll have an error with your shooting thing, with your sounds, right? So play one shot gave me no sound until I did that, right? And it didn't tell you what to do. The other way you can play sounds with your audio source is just audio source.play. So not play one shot, play the audio source, whatever it is. And the audio source also has a clip, so it'll just play the audio source. The only challenge with that is if you have more than one audio source, right? How do you link the audio source that you're playing right, with the shooting sound or whatever. And an example of that would be, let's say I have a 3D object, right? So I have a player that's in 3D, and I have footsteps. So it makes a chuck, 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 like a cluck, 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 or some kind of, I have a horse, right? That sound is maybe multiple sounds. So I have multiple sound clips that make the different horse clippings. The horse clop, 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 the clip, clop, right? Those sounds might be multiple audio sources, and I have to be able to name them, right? So we have to be able to get a reference to all those sounds in order for us to make it, and so it becomes more complex. So that's why it's better to do audio clips like this, like shoot sounds, so we can identify which sound is being made. You may not understand this now, but just take it from me. I'm telling you that audio is sometimes the most complex thing to make work right because of mixing, how loud it is. Sometimes you get an audio sound from the internet and it's really too loud, right? You got to modulate that sound, bring it right down, change the length of the sound. All that kind of stuff has to be done, and so sound can be quite a challenge as well. So I want you, for your homework, all right, is to finish off the tutorial. I've got both PowerPoint number 1 and PowerPoint number 2. You should be able to make the shooter, and I have an example of a working code that's online that I put up on GitHub, so you can compare what you got with what I did. And if it doesn't work, you're like, oh, I see what he's done right here. This is why mine didn't work. Yours may fail. I'm just telling you right now, because some of the stuff in the book, they leave a few things out, and then it didn't work, and then you can check and see what compare my code with your code, and then you can figure out the differences. It's a good learning thing, even though, again, can I do it with you? Yes, I can. But I'd rather build a brand new project with you from scratch that has nothing to do with the book in a different way, so that way you have another set of skills. On that, before we take a short break, because I've been talking for about an hour and a bit now, it's 2:30 already. I want you to also take a look at the tutorials online with Unity. If I go to Unity 3D Learn, here's the Unity 3D Learn. You can see that on this website there are a set of tutorials. Now some of them will not work the way they're made, because they've been made for a previous version of Unity, Unity 4.3 or 4.6. That's okay. You can make them all work if you recode everything, right? If you really want to. One of the ones that's relevant to what we're doing for assignment 1 is this one, Space Shooter Tutorial, right? Again, it has what they've done here that's a little differently than the other 2 tutorials we're learning with me, is they're using 3-dimensional objects, right, to create a 2D effect. That's neat. It's a cool idea, right? Some of it is more challenging, right? They also use particle systems for the explosion, and they also instantiate and destroy. They do those things that are, in my opinion, bad, right? But the great thing is they have some really cool assets. They explain how to do different things, like other kinds of particle effects, like for the player fire or exhaust that comes out of a ship and so on. All of that stuff is there, which is cool. Again, I just got to reiterate, if you use this tutorial from Unity 3D, you can't use any of the assets again, like making your own game. Please don't give me an asteroid from their game, because a lot of people do that. They give you their asteroid. It's a 3D object. It looks neat. And it's got variation because it appears to spin in 3D. It's still a 2D game, but the orthographic projection is 2D, but it's a 3D game. It looks kind of neat. But please don't use their assets. Use your own. Find other assets. There's tons of them out there. And we talked about that last time, right? So really cool tutorial, and there's lots and lots of sections here. Again, they talk about everything from setting things up, making boundaries, hazards, and enemies, all the same stuff we're going to be talking about, as well as how to score, how to extend the game by adding enemies that shoot, and so on. Really, some really cool tutorials. And I created a link for you in Slack to kind of give you that space shooter tutorial for Unity. So I'm telling you right now, it's always better to get as much practice as you can doing these simple tutorials, because when it comes to the Unity interface, right, you want to get over it within the first assignment. The Unity interface should be more comfortable for you. How to program with it, how to add objects in the hierarchy, how to create prefabs, how to make sounds, how to use the UI to create a scoreboard. All those kind of things you should be able to do within the first one. And then assignment 2, when you get to assignment 2, you've done all these things, and now we're doing slightly different things with physics. So it's not going to be such a departure, almost like learning everything again. It's not like that. Although I have to say, and I have to be honest with you, that when we do stuff with 3D in Unity, it's almost like learning a lot of things again. Because it's just that much more challenging, okay? There's lots of stuff to do with the 3D portion. I'm just putting it out there. I don't want you guys to be, to be upset about it or afraid about it. We're going to get there, but you need to jump off from somewhere. And this is the really cool tools you can use to, kind of make this stuff work. There's lots and lots of tutorials online, but you also have to optimize your time. I mean, I can give you 10 more tutorials online. You can look at lynda.com. There's tons and tons of tutorials there too. And on Pluralsight and 3D Motive and a bunch of other ones that are out there. But how much time do you have to do all these tutorials? Start on your game, man. That's what I always say, right? Tutorials are good to learn the basics, and then you have to take whatever you got from those tutorials and build something, right? Okay, that's it for me. Let's take a short break, 10 or 15 minutes, and when we come back, we'll continue with the Mail Pilot build. Okay, so I'm not going to finish off the twin stick shooter. I expect you to do that on your own. I've given you the PowerPoint, so you have all the details on how to do it, a step through, and it's exactly what comes from the book, right? But we're going to build a brand new project, Mail Pilot, today from beginning and as much as we can get done. I didn't get a lot done. I was hoping in the first half to get more done, but I had some questions and some other technical issues. So this second half, hopefully we'll get more done. We'll get as much as we can. So let's take a short break and come back and do that.